This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're going to share an interview we recorded for the Capitol Press Room television broadcast with Marie French, an energy and environmental reporter for Politico New York. Well, Marie, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. And I want to get into energy prices right now. And for some policymakers in New York, the boogeyman here, the cost driver that they point to is the state's 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which set into law a bunch of green energy and green emission goals. And you can debate whether that actually is the cost driver or not. We can maybe get into that later. But right now, I want to talk first about what state regulators, and specifically the Public Service Commission, is doing, which might actually impact that law. Can you walk us through what's at stake there and what their powers are?
Yeah, so in the climate law, there were built in some off-ramps, in particular on the electric side. So the state's climate law, as you know, has the goal of 70% renewables by 2030. Unlikely that the state is going to be able to meet that. And a zero emissions grid by 2040. Zero emissions has not yet really been defined. You know,
Sure.
What technologies qualify under that haven't been defined. You know, whether it could be renewable natural gas, hydrogen. You know, there's lots of debate about what that qualifies as.
Could nuclear be part of the conversation?
Nuclear definitely qualifies as zero emissions in the state's view,
Sure.
I would say. Whether that would be online by 2040 is anyone's guess at this point. So what the PSC did was they issued not even like an official, like, we're going to do this, a request for comment on whether they should open a process to look at those electric sector goals.
Sure.
Because in the climate law, they can consider them on the basis of various factors, including, you know, whether it's going to impact reliability and that kind of thing. So they've issued a request for comment.
Right. Well, how do you read into something like this? Because as you just pointed out, it's not their official way of doing things, and it is more informal. But do you view this as the beginning of a process that has a inevitable ending here? Or is there ambiguity about how this might play out?
There's lots of ambiguity, I think, but the reason that this is really significant is because the commission doesn't have to do anything when people petition them. In this particular way that they were petitioned in this case. So this was from business groups who are skeptical of the climate law, from members of the Climate Action Council who have been skeptical of the climate law as well. And so they are asking for clarity because they basically don't think the grid is going to remain reliable if they aren't, you know, able to repower natural gas plants, which right now, you know, developers, investors would look at New York State, look at that 2040 zero emissions timeline and say,
Right.
How can I recover my costs if I repower a gas turbine at this point?
Well, at the same time, you've got Governor Kathy Hochul, who began sort of subtly and now not so subtly indicating that she wants to change the underlying law itself and is looking to do that as part of the budget process. Do you have a sense of what sort of statutory changes she's looking to make as part of this push to potentially reduce costs in the long run and address that issue of reliability in the long run? Is it clear where she's heading?
Yeah, so this is important, right? The Public Service Commission only has some authority over the electric side of things. The governor has publicly said now that she wants changes in the budget to extend some of the timelines in the goal or in the law, and also address the issue of how New York counts emissions, which she has previously also pushed for in 2023. So that's where her focus is. You know, she's citing this lawsuit that said said the state had failed to follow the law, that said they should issue regulations by a certain time to achieve the goals. So she's pointing to that as some matter of urgency. Environmental lawyers dispute that, but.
Well, let's get back to that idea then of what's driving costs, because clearly the governor has staked out a position alongside Republican lawmakers, energy providers that utilize fossil fuels, that these mandates, the green emission goals, the green energy goals, are potentially going to drive up costs in the near future, if not already having an impact. Environmentalists, though, these advocates for this green transition who want to embrace renewable energy, say this is misleading. Can you walk us through a little bit of their argument?
Yeah, so on the environmental side, they point to a couple things, right? There's the issue that the CLCPA has not really been implemented.
Sure.
I mean, there are costs on your bill that the state utility regulator has said are linked to the climate law. It's about, depending on what utility area you're in, it's about 10%, or could be up to 10%. That's things like energy efficiency programs. It's things like heat pump incentives. But the biggest portion of it is the subsidies for the states, or one of the biggest portions of it is the subsidies for the state's nuclear fleet that already exists.
Which predates the CLCPA.
That program does predate the passage of the climate law. That's correct.
And what about the argument that the future implementation of the climate law is going to raise costs because the governor's office put out a memorandum that suggests that people's bills are going to go up thousands of dollars in terms of their overall energy costs? How are the environmentalists sort of disputing those numbers?
Yeah, well, first, in the short term, they're pointing out the fact that right now, a lot of the price increases you're seeing are because of natural gas costs and the volatility there in the market, and we could be seeing even more of that, with the war in Iran. So that's what they're pointing to in the short term. In the long term, yeah, the governor is saying, if I'm forced to implement this program that I supported in 2023 and have said is the way I want to implement the climate law, then it would cost New Yorkers a lot of money. So she doesn't want to be forced to do it. She wants to change the law, extend the timelines, and change the accounting method so that basically you have to reduce emissions less on the whole.
But there's been a concern that the scenarios that they've outlined with their cost estimates are not grounded in reality, that it takes the worst case types of expectations moving forward and doesn't account potential savings. Is that math, is that argument from environmentalists worth spending time on, or is that a flawed critique of the potential future costs?
So this memo that was released, was written and released by the Hochul administration, is focused on estimates based on 2024 modeling of what the price of carbon allowances would be. And then you apply that to sort of some of the numbers they had in the state energy plan for households and like how much they spend on energy and how much energy they use. So they are based on like no price caps for the allowances, no increased rebates. I mean, it does include a 30% rebate, which is in the law already. But, environmentalists argue you could increase that. If you're worried about that, increase the amount rebated to consumers. If you're worried about the prices being too high, set a cap. They say they're ready to negotiate over this issue and would be willing to come to the table and talk through it and not drop the lawsuit, but potentially settle the lawsuit, if the state actually were to implement this program.
Sure. Well, let's put aside the long-term problems and the debate over what's driving energy prices and talk about the issue of providing some short-term relief, because there have been a number of proposals that have been floated. Everybody who's running for office this year, which is the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor, all have their own ideas. Is there anything out there, though, that is particularly meaningful? Because my read on some of these proposals is that they are around the margins, so to speak. It's one thing to say we're finding $250 million of relief. It's another thing to look at that in the context of how much we're actually spending on bills and to see that's only a small percentage. So is there anything that really moves the needle as far as you're seeing out there?
It's tough. I mean, it's a thorny issue. The Public Service Commission has already approved rate increases that are going to come down the pike. They're going to have more cases in front of them soon to consider increases. They're sort of moving toward a more, I've kind of called it like almost an austerity sort of policy where, the recent Con Ed rate case was much, much lower than some of the historical ones we'd seen in the couple preceding years. But, people still aren't satisfied because that's still an increase.
Sure.
And it's a regressive cost for New Yorkers. The short-term relief options are kind of limited right now, because a lot of this is supply, and that's something that the state has relatively little control over, and many of the solutions, like the governor's idea of building more nuclear plants, is long-term and also debatable in terms of the cost impact. So there's proposals, in the Assembly. They have a proposal to rebate $2.6 billion to people as to alleviate energy cost concerns. That's kind of the Republicans kind of proposed a rebate as well before that.
With one of the big differences, I think, being where that money comes from, because the Assembly Democrats are basically saying, hey, let's raise state revenue to fund this type of credit, whereas the Republican response is, hey, there are existing pools of money that are out there. Sure, they might be committed, but no one actually has them in their pockets yet, so let's send it out somewhere else. A fair description?
I think so. I think they said that they thought some of their rebates could also be on budget versus from the utility collections that you're referring to for NYSERDA. But I mean, it's everybody's got proposals. Senator Kevin Parker, the Energy Committee chair in the Senate, called it a kind of a gimmick when he was asked about the rebates, and the Assembly also proposed a 2-year freeze on rates, including already approved rate increases, which would likely trigger some legal challenges or pushback from the utilities.
You say likely, I say most definitely, assuredly would probably get some challenges.
Who knows, Dave? We live in strange times.
Well, on that note, Marie, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
It's awesome to be here, as always.
And for more on what the governor is looking to do to the state's 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, here is the Buffalo Democrat speaking from the Capitol on Wednesday and responding to a question of whether it's as simple as extending the statutory deadlines in the climate law.
It could be that simple. And there's also metrics where put in place at the time, we're the only state in the nation under our law, other than Maryland, which followed our lead, which I think they're rethinking, which measures emissions based on a 20-year period versus 100. The international standards for cutting down on climate change has a 100-year standard. All the countries that are buying into this, every other state. But in the wisdom of the legislature and my predecessor, that's fine. They said we have to meet the goals in 20 years. The way to meet the goals is offshore wind, battery storage, onshore wind, solar arrays. And they're all getting clobbered. Also, did I happen to mention that Donald Trump's eliminated the tax incentives for those, the subsidies. So the false narrative is that I'm telling people their utility rates are higher because of CLCPA. That would be a stupid thing to say because it's not in effect yet. So those who've written articles in some of your publications, those who criticize me on the floor, they're flat out wrong. I've never said that. What I'm saying is I'm trying to stop your utility bills from going higher by rolling this out with a longer runway, which I think anybody who's got a rational brain would look at everything I just laid out and say, oh, I get it. The governor really is doing her best. She wants us to be successful. She'd love to be able to claim we did all this. But I have to also focus on the fact that people in our state are getting slammed, and they need relief. And so there's a way to get where we need to go, but just in a different time frame.
Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitolpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.